and welcome back to my channel. I hope that you are doing well. Today I have another true crime ASMR video for you. Today's video will be about Rachel O'Reilly. Rachel was a mother of two who had been found brutally beaten to death in what police initially believed was a home invasion gone wrong in the year 2004. In this case, technology was what really led investigators to the perpetrator of the crime. So, today's video will be added to my true crime ASMR series playlist, where you can find past and future videos in this series. So, let's get into it. Rachel O'Reilly, who was formerly Rachel If I butcher these names, I apologize. But Rachel Kalali, she was a mom of two who lived in Dublin. She lived in Nowell, Ireland, with her two sons and then husband Joe O'Reilly. Rachel was described as a live wire with a good heart and seemed to have no badness in her at all. Her and Joe's marriage had been taking a turn for the worst, and the couple had been arguing quite often. Rachel would be just 30 years old when her life would be cut tragically short. So, we will break down the events that happened that day on October 4th, 2004. At around 5:45 a.m., Joe would leave their home to go to the gym and then work. The gym was in Park West on the outskirts of Dublin. He was going there to meet up with a coworker to work out with. At 7:45 a.m., he would arrive at work. His work was Viacom Outdoor Advertising in the Bluebell Industrial Estate. He would send an email to Kieran Gallagher saying that he may be out of phone coverage for most of the morning and would arrange a lunch meeting with her for 2 p.m. O'Reilly would leave his office at 8:07 a.m. according to CCTV, which is the monitoring system or the cameras in Ireland. He claimed he was going to the CIE depot in Broadstone. At 9 a.m., Rachel, his wife, would drop off her eldest son, Luke, to school before dropping her younger son, Adam, off at daycare. Around 9:45 a.m., Rachel would return home. From 10 to 1:45 a.m., Joe would be sending her multiple text messages and would receive no answer. He would then proceed to leave several voice messages to Rachel's phone between 11:52 a.m. and 1:45 p.m., still receiving no answer. The daycare would call Joe and tell him that Rachel had never come to pick up Adam. At this time, Joe was starting to get a little worried, so he would call his mother-in-law to go check on Rachel while he went to go pick up Adam. Rachel's mother would not be prepared for the gruesome scene she would encounter. She would walk in to her daughter's bedroom to find her blood spattered and her face smashed to the point of being unrecognizable. At the same time that Joe had sent his mother-in-law to check on Rachel, he would be on his way home with Adam. He would arrive to the home to be stopped by the neighbor who would deliver the heartbreaking news. At this time, Joe would actually run past everyone to get into his home and was shouting, "Jesus, Rachel, what did you do?" As investigators arrived at the scene, they would find Rachel, her head to the left lying on the saddleboard, and her feet and body went into the bedroom. Investigator Pat Mary recalled her head looking like a beetroot due to there being so much blood. He remembered there being a big slit above her right ear that actually exposed her brain. Pat Mary reported that showed how vicious this attack was, and that whoever killed Rachel hated her because there was so much viciousness and hatred in the assault. When Pat arrived at the house, Rachel's family had already gathered. All he could hear was the heartbroken wailing and crying from the families, as he had to remove them from the scene to preserve the evidence. However, there would be one person missing from the grieving family: Joe O'Reilly. Joe had actually left and had been standing out on the road as investigators, ambulances, and the families all were coming to grieve and support each other for what had happened to Rachel. Pat really found it odd that he wasn't filled with the same grief either. He would go and shake hands with Joe, and he told him who he was and that he would get to the bottom of who did this to his wife. And all Joe had to say was, "Oh, right, grand." Later in the evening that day, Mary spoke with O'Reilly again to ask who would have killed Rachel, or if there was any reason she would have been killed in such a horrific manner. But O'Reilly said no. I said, had she any enemies? And he said she had no enemies. She was well liked. Pat would go on and say maybe that Rachel had been having an affair and a disgruntled wife had someone do her in, which Joe again said no. And he even went further to say neither of us were having affairs. The scene of the crime had shown it being a home invasion, as possessions were missing and the room was in shambles. At first, no one suspected Joe. At first. That evening, Joe would stay with his mother in Dunleer. Joe would have his mother wash his clothes and would actually go to bed quite soundly. Rachel's funeral would come and go, and her family would still have no answers. Soon after the funeral, Joe O'Reilly would invite Rachel's parents and family over for dinner. He would then persist to show them the scene of the crime and would even go on to reenact it. Her parents, Jim and Rose Kalali, were in shock as Jo reenacted how Rachel was killed just days after her funeral. Rachel's dad would go on the radio to speak with Sean Rourke, and he would recall that Jo brought them down to the house, invited them down there. He had gotten the keys back from police after they did the search around the place. Jo told his in-laws that he had gotten great peace getting back into the house. He said he got an inner peace from being there and said it might work for yous as well. Jim would then state that Jo would turn to Jim, his wife Rose, Rachel's brother Paul, and his wife and say, "Come on up and I'll show you what the murderer must have done." Jo reenacted the entire murder. Jim said he had to leave the room due to being sick. This was the day that all eyes began to shift to Jo. Soon after this encounter, Pat Mary had brought Joe O'Reilly back in for questioning and had again asked him if he was having an affair. It would be revealed that he was, in fact, having an affair. And now, Mary would then have a motive. This led to a thorough investigation of Joe O'Reilly. The footage, I'm assuming that this CCTV footage is like cameras that are on traffic lights in America. They had recorded Joe's car passing the quarry right next to his and Rachel's home before the murder. It would later also be found that Joe's text messages had all went off of towers that were near his and Rachel's home. So his alibi of being at work or wherever were now all lies. Joe had been trying to leave Rachel and had grown to despise his wife. He did not have the funds to go through a divorce and didn't want to have to be away from his sons. So instead of just leaving Rachel, he plotted to get rid of her. Rachel had been suspicious of him having an affair for some time, but Joe had continuously lied and hid his affair with Nikki Belly. On that fatal day, Joe had not only bludgeoned his wife to death with a dumbbell, but staged the scene to make it appear as a burglary. So that night he was staying with his mom. He had her wash away all the evidence and really had thought he had committed the perfect crime. Investigators would also retrieve a note that Joe had written and put in Rachel's grave the day of her funeral. On the note, it said, "I'm sorry." As investigators gathered more and more evidence, it wasn't hard for them to connect the dots and propose who was responsible for Rachel's death. With a mountain of evidence against him, Joe was handed a life sentence in 2007. And Joe still has never admitted to the killing of his wife. Joe O'Reilly is currently serving life at the Tough Midlands Prison in Port Louis after being transferred in 2022. For the first 15 years of his sentence, he resided at Dublin's Wheatfield Prison. Since his imprisonment, O'Reilly has made a number of attempts to appeal his conviction, all of which have been refused. He has also made attempts to be moved into an open prison. Now, open prison is like open jail, I guess, and this is pretty much where prisoners can come and go. Like, they can get jobs and they stay in the prison, but it's just not a lot of supervision, which I'm assuming this is like parole, kind of. Earlier this year, Rachel's mother, Rose, said if O'Reilly was granted his wish to move to an open prison, it would finish her. I mean, the man traumatized her. He knew that she was going to be coming home to her daughter being bludgeoned to death and murdered in the worst way by someone that her family really had thought had her best interests at heart and was there to protect her. And it was actually quite different. So, that is today's video. I know it's a little bit shorter, but I hope you still enjoyed it anyway. I really just can't believe someone can be this evil. This man just didn't want to be bothered with the work of leaving his life. So he figured he'd just murder her instead. Just such a selfish and psychopathic way of thinking, let alone bringing your in-laws to torture them by reenacting the murder of their daughter. But I will be adding this video to my true crime ASMR series playlist. And this is where you can find past and future videos in this series. If you have any recommendations for future video topics, please let me know in the comments below. I do apologize for any background noise. Hopefully in the future I'll be able to have a space where that won't be an issue. Thank you again for watching.